Hello, welcome to the Stockyard Industrial Lead. I'm Eric Miller, and today we're going to be talking about the importance of open space on a model railroad layout, and especially for even small switching layouts. And in this episode, we're going to be talking specifically about the importance of having abandoned industrial spurs in your urban industrial switching layout, if that's what you're doing. And so I'm going to show you some of the abandoned spurs that I have on my layout, and I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about why I think they're important. So as you can see here, we've got abandoned spur. Might be not too obvious at first because it looks like a fairly well maintained track. I haven't done scenery in this area yet, and so there'll definitely be some weeds and whatnot on this track. But if you look closely here, the spur doesn't come up to the main line. It just ends right here, was cut off, and you can see that they recently redid the grade crossings here and just decided to completely cut off where the turnout used to be. So why are abandoned industrial spurs important, or why do I feel that they're important? And so again, not everyone may not agree with this, but I just wanted to give you kind of my thoughts on this issue and why I like having them on my layout. First, I'm going to give you a couple of resources and to look at, and these are just good for looking at open space for your layout in general. First, everybody knows about Lance Minheim, and he's got several good books, and so one that I would recommend is called How to Design a Small Switching Layout. Unfortunately, I can't find my copy right now. I wonder if I loaned it out to somebody, but I'll put the title here on the video. So that's a really good one. The other one that's kind of got some similar themes to it is this one here, which is called Minimalist Model Railroading. I'll try to get that in the shot here, by Jim Spavins. So both of these books talk about how important it is to have some open space in your model railroad layout somewhere. Basically, there's several reasons to do this, but most importantly, you want to create some space so it looks like you're actually going somewhere. This is important if you're doing a big model railroad, even a small one. But I think for small ones, it's really important to consider because a lot of times we think, okay, I'm doing an industrial urban scene. I want to cram everything in there. I want lots of activity. Everything has got to look busy. Well, you still have a lot of open space. If you look at in any city, if you look at some of the local jobs that they run, you'll notice that they do pass through some areas where there's a lot of open space, parks, trees, stuff like that, maybe housing developments, things like that. And so those are important to incorporate in our layout to make it look more realistic and also make it look more like the locomotive is actually going somewhere, even though in a smaller switching layout, kind of like I have, you still are modeling a somewhat compressed scene or a smaller space, not as long as a larger layout, for example. But I still feel that it's important to kind of show that you're traveling through an area and going from point A to point B. And so Lance Minheim's book especially, he talks about having in a small switching layout, you will usually have like two scenes. You might just have one, but it's really important to have some kind of a open space area so it's more realistic and doesn't look like there's activity all over the place. And so you kind of get a break from the railroad. So those are some of the reasons why I like doing it on my layout, and just trying to replicate the prototype and also make it feel like you're going somewhere. So in this part, I'm going to talk about the abandoned industrial spurs that I have on my layout, which is something that Lance really doesn't cover. I don't think anybody really talks about it. I can't find a whole lot of good sources for this, so that's why I feel that it's important to make a video on it. And then in the next series that I'll do after this one, maybe in a couple weeks or so, I'll talk about the just basic open space and parks and stuff like that, and show you some concepts that I have in my layout for that. So there's several different ways that you can do abandoned industrial spurs. And basically the ideas that I've gotten from mine, I've just went out and looked at the real railroad and taken a look at what's out there and how they do it. And then I try to incorporate those ideas into my railroad. So I'll show you a few different examples. All right, so the first one here is this, again, completely abandoned spur, as you can see. And one of the things I did is I laid the track just like normal. The difference is I painted the top brown or kind of rusty color to make it look like it doesn't get used. And basically what this is this is a customer that used to receive rail service and no longer does. And it's been so many years, the railroad just decided, we're not going to maintain the switch, the turnout, the frogs anymore, so let's just cut it off, which is pretty common for railroads to do. Now, if you're modeling a short line or regional, they might keep it in there longer than like a class 1 railroad would. Just something to think about. But I thought this was a really cool look, and so I wanted to, I've got some customer or some, I should say industries on my layout that don't get rail service, and so I thought it would be cool to have one in particular that just has an old rail spur. And it's kind of cool because you've got the main line here going by in front, and then you've got an active spur back there for the Millard refrigerated services, and then in between that you've got the abandoned spur. So it kind of creates some a bit of open space there doing that. And again, I think it's important not to go overboard and cram as many industries as you possibly can into an area, because you realize that first of all, as you'll see in a lot of Lance Minheim's books, you can actually have a lot of activity with just one spur. And this spur in particular has 3 car spots. You can see there's cars in 2 of them. And so that's enough activity that you really don't need another active spur close by. There's a lot going on here anyways. And so it's kind of nice not to have so much activity. And you'll notice a lot of urban locals just have a handful of customers that they'll switch on a day. And so that kind of supports that as well. The other thing that I feel is important, and again, this kind of relates to the era that I chose. I modeled the early 90s. Basically any modern era, kind of, early 80s and later, after the Staggers Act, basically you start to see more and more industries that have abandoned spurs. And so that's why I find this is realistic to do. And again, just go out there and try to find examples of it. It won't be that hard. So I've got a couple of other abandoned spurs that I'll show you. One is active, and then I've got another inactive one that we'll take a look at after that. So here's an example of an active abandoned spur, and you'll have to excuse the mess back here. I'm still working on the scenery that's over here. I'm also still working on finishing up the industries in this area, so this building back here looks very messy, but it'll come together eventually, and I still need to do the creek and the scenery around here. But basically this spur back here, as you can see, is an active spur. And this has, you can see the shininess on the tops there. It's maintained just like it was in service. The only thing is I don't have a customer on here that gets rail service. So why is it still open? Well, what's happened, this is, this basically shows a customer that's recently abandoned its rail service. And which, there's some that, within the last 5 years, they might have just picked up, maybe it changed hands, maybe somebody else bought this property and they don't have to ship by rail. And so I wanted to have an example of that on the layout. And then I also like having places, as you might recall a video that I did a few months ago, where I go through my off-spot staging areas. I like having those areas around here. So this is used for off-spot staging. So the railroad still owns the track. The customer is okay with having the rail cars near its building now and then. Not a big deal. It's an industrial area, so they're not going to get upset about that. And so this is just a place where the railroad can stage some cars. It could be anything from when you're switching these industries here, you could stage cars, you could do off-spot storage for one of the customers. You could also store some maintenance away stuff. A lot of things can show up here. So in addition to kind of supporting the abandoned spur, it's also a way to add some flexibility and some interest to your layout, because you can put some interesting things here. But the main thing is it's not serving a customer. And so it's just kind of a little extra capacity, I guess you could say, for the rest of the railroad. So that's kind of a cool thing. All right, so the next one we'll get to is also here in Bellevue, the other example of an abandoned spur. And this one is really abandoned. Now, it's pretty similar to the other one that I showed you in Omaha. Okay, so what we're looking at here is we got basically the main line coming in here. And then over here is the lumber yard. So it's obviously active. We got cars there. This is inactive. You can see I started some scenery. This is where I first started testing some static grass, so it's obviously not perfect, needs some work. But it gives you a little bit of an idea of how I want to differentiate this abandoned spur from the main line over here. And so what I did, again, the rust on the rails and just having it abandoned. Otherwise, it's pretty much it's pretty much otherwise a the same way that I would construct an active spur. Now for this one, what I wanted to do is not completely cut it off from the main line. I wanted to still have the switch here. So again, it might not be abandoned quite as long as that first example that I showed you, but longer than the second example. So I'm trying to have some variety in my abandoned spurs here. Now initially what I did is I actually left the frog in place right here. The problem is I actually had a crew come in, and I also had the switch stand still here because I wanted it to look like, hey, this was just abandoned not too long ago, but it's not in use. Well, I actually had a crew use this for some off-spot storage, and I was like, nah, that's not what I wanted you to do. I don't want you to use this at all. So what I went ahead and did is I left this switch point here. I took the frog out. I took the switch point out, and then as you can see, I cut this part off here. So there's no physical way to get a car back there now. So I went a little step further. And this is more like what a real railroad would do, because again, they don't want these to be maintenance nightmares. Take out the frog, for example, get rid of the switch points. So you just have basic rail coming through here. However, if a customer ever does come in here, which is probably especially interesting or of interest, I should say, for a short line railroad that wants to grow business and get more of those local customers that class ones maybe aren't quite as interested in, they'll want to leave this track here and make it as easy as possible for a customer to get rail service again. So all you have to do is just throw a turnout in here again, connect the rails, and you're up and running. So I wanted an example of that. It's kind of cool. It's not quite as obvious as the first example I showed you, where you'd have to like rebuild the road and completely put in a new turnout, but it's also not being used either. So those are the three examples that I have of abandoned industrial spurs. And I don't know, I think after doing some of these, I wouldn't mind doing more. I think a good rule of thumb is maybe kind of have, like, if you think about it, 25% of your layout maybe could be abandoned industrial spurs. Again, it really depends on what your area is and also your location. You might be in an area that doesn't have as many, or you might be in one that's, a very old industrial park that's had a lot of customers that have left, and they, a lot of tracks ripped out. I mean, just look around at industrial parks today and you'd be surprised how many have, areas where tracks have been ripped out. Some places have even, put up buildings where the tracks have been, and you can barely see, where the industrial spurs used to be. So there's a lot of ideas out there. If you just look at the prototype, these are the three examples I have on my layout, just based on what I've looked at and what I'm interested in. So it really is up to you, whatever you're interested in. But I thought this would be good to show you and just kind of talk about the importance of it. And I think it really does bring some realism in there, and also doesn't make your layout too busy, because again, what I like to do on my layout is focus more on the actual operations of, moving these cars back here on this industrial spur and going through the motions of how they're spotted, and slowing that process down, rather than making it a giant switching puzzle for your crew that comes to visit and gets to be a bit of a headache. So that's kind of what I like to do, and I think this helps support that. So I just wanted to show that to you today and talk about it a little bit. Feel free to leave any questions if you have any comments, and as always, let me know if there's anything else you want to see on this channel in the future. Hope to do another operations video next week, and then I'm hoping the week after that to finally give an update on the Super 7 project that I've been putting off for a few weeks just because I've been busy with other things. So that's coming up, and then of course I'll do a part 2 to this where I talk about other kinds of open space, just kind of open space in general. I'll talk about the importance of having like a park or a residential neighborhood, things that don't really contribute to the model railroad, but are important to the layout overall. So All right, so that's all I got today. Thanks for watching and stopping by. I hope you enjoyed this and hope there's some takeaways for you here. And again, it's really up to you what you want to do on your layout, of course. These are just some ideas that I thought would be interesting to bring up. So take care, and I'll see you next time.